This is Chapter 15, the Federal Reserve and Monetary Policy. Discussion number 1, the structure of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve was created in the early 1900s to stabilize the monetary policy of the United States. In other words, they wanted to make monetary policy in the best interest of the country in the long run, and not necessarily what politicians wanted to do with the monetary supply. So it was created to be separate from the United States government. And we're going to deal with how that was accomplished in this discussion. But as it's responsible for the monetary policy, it controls the amount and the availability of money in our national economy. Now, the Federal Reserve established 12 different banks throughout the United States, each of them to be headed by a bank director. Now, the bank director was to run the Federal Reserve in their region, and they were to be able to create reports and keep an eye on the local economy, and to be able to report their findings of what's going on in their region of the country to the rest of the Federal Reserve directors. In this way, they'd be able to keep tabs on the national economy and see kind of what's going on. Now, the Federal Reserve is headed by the Board of Governors. 7 of these 12 directors who are appointed by the United States, and they are confirmed by the Senate. They serve for 14 years. Each one term ends every 2 years. So every 2 years, term is done where the president gets to nominate someone, and they are confirmed by the Senate. This is the best way that we can politically, at least as we have established, where politics and political leaders as elected will make a decision, but that has to be deemed that they will do a good job and not just a political job, because they have to be approved by the president and approved by the Senate. Now, the chairman of the board is usually specifically selected for this group, and they are confirmed by the Senate as well to be the chairman of the Board of Governors. And then this is the person that pretty much everyone listens to as far as what's going to happen with the Federal Reserve, what's going to happen with interest rates, and the buying and selling of government securities. They supervise the 12 Federal Reserve banks, and they regulate all the federally chartered banks as well. So if you see any bank for example, locally you'll see, for example, Adams County National Bank. If it says national, which means they are specifically chartered by the federal government to exist. Other banks can be chartered by the state governments as well. But they are regulated, if they're a national bank, by the Board of Governors. Now, there's another group within the Federal Reserve called the Federal Advisory Council. There are 12 members who are appointed by the Reserve Bank directors. In other words, these are assistants or people that they trust. They meet at least 4 times a year with the information from all the local regions of the Federal Reserve banks, and they give their opinions as to general business conditions and which way things might be going. Now, while the Board of Governors regulates the Federal Reserve and that type of thing, the big mover where everyone pays attention to for the Federal Reserve is the Federal Open Market Committee. There are 12 members of this group, including the 7 Board of Governors. Also included is the New York Reserve Director, mainly because of New York City and Wall Street, and a lot of our economy goes through New York and Wall Street. So, and also the New York Federal Reserve Director is responsible for keeping track of all the buying and selling of all the securities, whether it be Treasury bonds, Treasury notes, Treasury bills. And because they're all being sold on Wall Street or other investment houses in that area, and also 4 other Federal Reserve directors. The Federal Open Market Committee is chaired by the Board of Governors. So if you are the head of the Federal Reserve, you're also the head of the Federal Open Market Committee. This is the primary group which controls the amount and availability of money in the national economy, essentially by adjusting the interest rates. If they decide that they're going to increase interest rates on loans that the Federal Reserve makes to banks, that will increase the interest rates as the banks loan them to customers. If they decide to decrease the interest rates as they loan money to banks, that will decrease the interest rates as banks are competing with each other. And so Federal Reserve makes a lot of decisions but as they play with the interest rates going up and down, they have a huge effect on the interest rates across the country. This concludes discussion number 1, the structure of the Federal Reserve.